Lord, you alone are worthy of praise, and we give you thanks, because we know that what we have, what we hope to be, is centered in you. That you have called us to be your people, and only in you can we be satisfied and find eternal life. We thank you that you have given us freedom from sin, that you have moved us into the kingdom of your Son, and you want us to be reflecting your image in all we do. Lord, we need your strength to do that, and we are still prone to go our own way and do our own thing. So we ask that you will help us by your Spirit to yield to you, to allow you to do whatever is needed in our hearts today to bring us to the place where we should be in our walk with you. Give us eyes that are illuminated through your word, that we can understand it and then we can use it. Help us grow in you, especially in love for you and for one another. We pray this in Christ's name. Amen. We started talking about the prophets last time and came to that section on ecstasy, and that's probably where we went astray. Ecstasy means to stand outside oneself, stand aside oneself. And there are cases where ecstasy is mentioned in the Scripture, but by and large the prophets that we are familiar with do not engage in this. They are in control of their facilities. Even in the New Testament we are told that the spirit of the prophet is subject to the prophet. So this means that you have full control of whatever you do, and this is the case with most of the prophets. There are times, like with Saul, when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him and he became a different person and prophesied with the prophet. This seems to be more of a sign to him than actual prophesying that we would call prophesying. More important for the prophet is the call, and this should be emphasized. If Navi itself, the Hebrew word for prophet, means one who is called, then there should be emphasis upon the call of the prophet. And most of them tell us of a specific instance when God spoke to them. Amos, for instance, says that I'm not a prophet or the son of a prophet, but God called me from tending the sheep and said, go preach. Isaiah has a vision of God in the temple, and that gives him the direction for his ministry. Jeremiah tells us that before he was formed in the womb, God called him to be a prophet. And Micah, in contrasting himself with the other prophets, says, but as for me, I am filled with the Spirit of the Lord. So he is saying there is a specific time when God spoke to him and told him he was to prophesy. When we talk about the prophets, it perhaps is more important to speak about his wholehearted devotion to Yahweh than his moral character. There are times when prophets might do things that we would question, yet if they are sold out to Yahweh to do what he wants done, that is the important factor. And I think that that's the important factor with us too. We're going to have many times when people will fail us, and if we judge them on the basis of an action, then we are missing their relationship with God. Sometimes it's blatant, and in the day of press coverage, television and radio, it sometimes is blown out of proportion. We should stress their devotion to God and what they are attempting to do, rather than place as much emphasis on their moral character.
That is the way we should judge the prophet, especially the prophet in the Old Testament, whether they are wholeheartedly sold out to Yahweh. Now, the New Testament does add a little bit more to that, and the moral character of the prophet becomes is very important. There are several prophets that are found, various classifications to be given to those prophets. Those that come before Moses. We have Enoch, that is sometimes called a prophet. Abraham is called a prophet. In the passages that we've just been studying, of course, we have Moses, who is considered one of the greatest of the prophets, Samuel. These are the pre-monarchic prophets. During the time of David, we have several, Gad and Nathan, and then a little later there's Elijah and Elisha, and Micaiah. So those are sometimes called non-writing prophets, in that they haven't left us books of their prophecy. They do tell us considerably about themselves. In the case of Elijah and Elisha, we know quite a bit about them and what they did. But those are accounts that are written in the third person. They're not first-person accounts. In the 8th and the 7th centuries is where we have what we call our writing prophets, and that has a little different emphasis where the attention is turned more to the people, to the nation, than to individual actions. And they leave us written messages. This same thing is carried on by the prophets after the exile, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, where they are interested in calling the attention of people to the covenant relationship, saying they need to go back to the proper relationship with Yahweh. Prophecy in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, and today should be God's message to the present situation. They are deeply involved in the life and the death of the nation of Israel. Prophets in the New Testament are basically giving forth God's message. We do have a place where Agabus prophesied concerning what's going to happen to Paul at Jerusalem, and also concerning the famine that's going to come, and those are, in a sense, predicted. So probably because of that, we've shifted the emphasis to where we think prophecy as prediction rather than speaking forth God's message. And the prophets in the Old Testament almost exclusively had to do with the everyday events in the lives of the people and how that related to their covenant relationship to God. Whenever there is a statement that we could call predictive, it's usually measured in terms of how the contemporary message fits into God's overall plan. So that it isn't just Messiah will be born at Bethlehem, where that is a predictive prophecy, but it would fit more into, well, what is God's overarching plan for everything that He wants to do, and how does this prophecy fit into that? Eschatology is basically that. It's the climax of God's plan. And so often we emphasize the predictive element so that we miss the real thrust of the prophets. And we don't want to do that. we'll be coming back and dealing with the prophets and their particular messages. I'd like to turn now to poetry. As much of the prophetic material is going to be poetry, and we need to have some idea of how to deal with what we find in Scripture. Those of you who have already had the Intro to Old Testament Literature class will remember that we discussed poetry there. It's very difficult to discuss biblical literature without speaking about poetry. All you have to do is take a modern translation of the Bible and open it anywhere, and you're going to get poetic form. This happens to be Psalms. Most of Psalms is poetry. But go over to the prophets. There's Jeremiah. This little passage here is prose, but the rest of it is poetry. And most oracles are given in poetic form. Now there's Jeremiah again, where most all of it is prose. He has more forms than anyone else. Here's Ezekiel getting into the temple rebuilding. Most of that is in prose. But other passages in Ezekiel, it's like most of what I turn to in Ezekiel is all prose. And there's a little bit of poetry. Others, like the 12, Hosea, Joel, those are almost entirely poetry. Now, how does poetry differ from prose? If you were being brought up on poetry today, I think you'd have to say there isn't any difference between poetry and prose. That I hear read on the radio as poetry, I said, no, that's not poetry. That's just heightened prose. Where you choose your words, but there is no rhythm, there is no rhyme. They're the things that we normally associate with poetry in English. Hebrew does not have rhyme, and it does not have a meter, except in the dirge. But we have to try to analyze Hebrew poetry on a different foundation, and that is done using what's called parallelism. Most all Hebrew poetry is parallelism. There are several types of this. The first one is synonymous. Now if you put several of these on the board, then we'll discuss them. We may call it a little bit different from what the sword is in the book, but basically they'll be the same. All of this will be parallelism. And first type is synonymous. And second is antithetic. Those are going to be something easy to recognize. And then emblematic. Stereotype. Introverted. And then I'll put down the last one, the catch-all, which is synthetic. And there are some who question whether that even should be listed as parallelism. Hebrew uses a 2 or 4 line stick, or stick-off in all Greek, where in the first line you make a statement, and then in the second line you say the same thing, only using different words. If those 2 lines say the same thing, then it is called synonymous parallelism. example of that. We'll see what Joel has here. Hear this, you elders. Listen, all who live in the land. That's synonymous parallelism. Where hear is the same as listen, and elders is the same as you who live in the land. That was Joel, the first chapter, second verse. They say the same thing. Two lines can say the same thing. It's synonymous parallelism. Now they can further divide that into complete synonymous parallelism and incomplete, where they are word for word, then it is complete synonymous parallelism. And sometimes it says the same thing, but they vary it just slightly, where one will add a word compensating for what's in the other line. See if I can find the
61, so that is a Joel 2.
Joel. That's synonymous parallelism. Yes, blow the trumpet in Zion, sound the alarm on my holy hill. The blow and sound are the same. Trumpet and alarm would be the same in Zion and holy hill. That's complete synonymous parallelism. Some of our most famous passages are synonymous. How about Isaiah 61? In Isaiah 61, 62, there are good examples of most of this. 61, verses 5 and 6. Isaiah 61, verses 5 and 6. Aliens will shepherd your flocks. Foreigners will work your fields and vineyards. And you will be called priests of the Lord. You will be named ministers of our God. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast. In that case, we have aliens and foreigners, shepherd and work, but then there is a slight difference. One is flocks, and the other is fields and vineyards. But the idea is the same. Foreigners will do your work for you. That's synonymous parallelism, what would be called incomplete synonymous parallelism. And then in the 6th verse, you will be called, you will be named. Same thing. Priests, ministers, same thing. Of the Lord, of our God, same thing. And so you say exactly the same thing, only the words that you use are different. You will feed on the wealth of nations, and in their riches you will boast, and you will feed would be the equivalent to you will boast, and the wealth of nations is changed slightly in their riches, but you have basically the same thing. That's right. That last verse is the introvert or hayat. That is a crossover. When you have introverted or a hayat, it's where the first element is put second, and then you have A, B, and then B, A in the second one. Yes, that's a good observation. It's difficult in the English translation to find examples of introverted parallelism, because our English word order demands that the subject come first and the object comes last. And so you can't use the Hebrew format to do it. One of the best examples of this is the heavens declare the glory of God. And in that we have heaven and declare and glory. And then what do you have in the second line? Firmament shows and then handiwork. Now that is synonymous parallelism in English. In Hebrew, it is chiastic. It says the heavens declare the glory of God. His handiwork shows the firmament. And Hebrew can do it because they indicate what is the object and what is the subject. But when we say his handiwork shows the firmament, that says something else. But Hebrew puts the first element third and the third element first.
Is there significance in doing introverted rather than synonymous?
No, it gives a nice variety. There's a lot of variety in Hebrew. A lot of variety. It's fun just to sit down and read through a psalm and try to analyze each of the verses to see what type of poetry was used.
So the Hebrews didn't care whether it was synonymous or introverted, they just did it for variety.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's the same way we do in good poetry. In good poetry, you can put objects first. In English poetry. Because it's worked out so that it can be understood. It's that saying that our translation is very good English poetry. Now, antithetic parallelism is where the first line makes the statement and then the second line says the opposite. Often the first will be a positive statement and then the second will be a negative statement, but the meaning is the same. Now, where would you find examples of this? Yeah, Proverbs is the best place to find it. And I've just turned here to Proverbs 15 and verse 14 or 13 or 18 or 19 or 20, 21, 22, 23. In verse 13, a happy heart makes the face cheerful, but heartache crushes the spirit. You have the but. And the but is the antithesis. This is what does that, but this does that. That's Proverbs 15, verse 13. And then in 14, the discerning heart seeks knowledge, but the mouth of a fool feeds on folly. In verse 18, a hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. And so you get opposites, but the same meaning. One is negative, the other is positive. So that anything like that is antithetic parallelism. Now the emblematic is where part of the statement is a statement of fact and the other is a comparison. And the best place for this is the Song of Songs. It's emblematic, it's symbol for a comparison. Chapter 2 of Song of Songs, verse 3, or verse 2. Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the maidens. Now the statement of fact is my darling among the maidens. Now the comparison is like a lily among thorns. So that you're making a comparison of the one to the other, and this type of poetry will always be introduced with an like or an as. Verse 3, like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my lover among the young men. Then we have that beautiful description of his lover in chapter 4. How beautiful you are, my darling, oh, how beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Then beginning with the last part of that verse, your hair is like a flock of goats descending from Mount Gilead. Your teeth are like a flock of sheep just shorn, coming up from the washing. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your temples behind your veil are like the halves of a pomegranate. Your neck is like the Tower of David, built with elegance. So all those are emblematic. And I've got to remember to get the picture that I have of that copy. Perhaps when we get to that, I'll have thought to do that. I have I don't know who it was that drew a picture based on this description, and it is very interesting. But that's emblematic. Then there is stair-like. And as you would guess, stair-like is where you build. You go up. Psalm 29. Ascribe to the Lord, O mighty ones. Ascribe to the Lord glory and honor. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. That's ascribe to the Lord. Ascribe, worship. So it's building. Or Amos. What the locus number 1 left, locus number 2 ate. And what locus number 2 left, locus number 3 ate. And that sort of thing. Where he talks about the locusts. That also is stair-like. Or we have one of the Psalms which speaks about giving praise. Praise the Lord, O house of Aaron. Praise the Lord, all priests. Praise the Lord, all the nation. So it takes one phrase, continues to use that phrase, and then builds upon it. And that's called stair-like. A part of the first line is repeated and made the point of departure for a new development. I've already mentioned the introverted with reference to the passage, the heavenly bed of glory of God, and that's where we have chiasm. And I may have an example here of Psalm 2:9. It should be chiasm or introverted. Pardon? Sorry. With introverted and chiasm, they're the same thing. Psalm 2:9 says, "You will rule them with an iron scepter. You will dash them to pieces like pottery." Well, that doesn't sound like it. That certainly doesn't sound like chiasm. Why did I write that down? It certainly isn't, though, in English, because rule and dash would be the two that are the same, and iron scepter and pottery are not synonymous in that sense. No, that's not a good example in English. No, that's what is called synthetic, where you say, "Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling." That expresses new ideas, and so that's what's called building. And synthetic means building. It does not mean imitation or what is not real, as we think of with synthetic. It has the meaning of building. Let's see if I have sterilite always takes and repeats a part of it, like ascribe to the Lord, ascribe. Where synthetic merely gives you new information on the next line. Yeah, and I don't see it myself. Let's try Psalm 30, verse 8. See if that will work. I have found some of those, but I don't have them in these notes. I have another folder where I have just poetic literature, and to you, O Lord, I called. To the Lord I cried for mercy. No, that isn't it either.
How about Psalm 92:9?
92:9?
Yeah. 6 days.
No. That is more like synthetic.
Isaiah 43. I gotta read it.
Yes, that is. A voice of one calling, "In the desert, prepare the way for the Lord. Make straight in the wilderness a highway for our God." Yes, you have the first two elements. In the desert, prepare, and make straight in the wilderness. And then the third element remains the same. So this would be A, B, C, B prime, A prime, C. So these two elements here are chiasm in Isaiah 40. Prepare in the desert, or in the desert, prepare a highway. Make straight, which corresponds to prepare, and then in the wilderness is the same as in the desert. And then the third element is synonymous in the same spot. That's a good example of that.
Isn't that Isaiah 61:63?
Which one? 61.
6B. Will feed on the dwelling places of the rivers.
Yes, that's also a good example. Isaiah 61, 6, and the last half of that. I see that Archer doesn't even consider the chiasm as a type of poetry. He sticks only to the first four there, and then the sixth one as sort of a catch-all. Now, let's take a look at that synthetic, because that occurs frequently, and it is more like what I would call our poetry in some of our writers today. If we can take one of the Psalms and just go through and analyze it. Take Psalm 119. We have lots of material to work with in that psalm. Blessed are they whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord. Now the blessed are they, you see, is not repeated in the second line, but the ways and walk would be similar. Blameless is replaced by according to the law of the Lord. So it's not synonymous. It doesn't say the same thing. It adds the element that the blameless, because you walk according to the law of the Lord. It adds new information. In verse 2, blessed are they who keep his statutes and seek him with all their heart. And seeking him with all their heart is additional emphasis rather than just keep his statutes. So when you have development like that, that's what's called synthetic parallelism. It gives us new information, but they're not exactly the same. In verse 3, they do nothing wrong. They walk in his ways. Now that's almost antithetic in that sense. But it does not contain our but. Verse 4, you have laid down precepts that are to be fully obeyed. And that's just a continuation of the same idea. So that is synthetic. Verse 5 is about the same. Oh, that my ways were steadfast in obeying your decrees. So that most all of the Psalm 119 is in what we would call synthetic parallelism.
For antithetic, you have to have the word but in there?
Most all the time you do. Because you have the one statement, and then you make a second statement, which is the antithesis, and that usually is introduced by but. Now, in the case there with verse 3, you could introduce a but. They do nothing wrong, but they walk in his ways. And that would be antithesis.
Okay, since the but is not there already, it's not.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it as antithesis. The poetry in the Old Testament also makes use of other devices. And not only do we have the poetic form itself, but we have the use of literary style. For instance, graded numbers. In Amos begins his attack on Israel by attacking the nations round about, and he introduces each one with a formula for 3 transgressions of except for 4. So he uses the 3 plus 1. In the Proverbs, we have the same thing. There are 3 things that the Lord detests. There are 4 things that he detests. So that you give a number, and then you add 1 to it. That gives the idea that the first number is enough, and the additional 1 is more than enough. And it's a very nice literary device that is used by the writers. Micah 5:5 has that. Not necessarily, because sometimes what you do is merely add to, like for 3 transgressions, even for 4. It's not contrasting the 3 and the 4. It's just adding more to it. In Micah 5:5, when the Assyrian invades our land and marches through our fortresses, we will raise up against him 7 shepherds, even 8 leaders of men. 7 shepherds, even 8 leaders of men is the number plus 1. So that when you look at that, you should not try to figure out, well, what are these 7 shepherds and who are the 8 leaders of men? See, it's merely using the graded numbers for effect. Proverbs.
Just prior to that, we talked about through the land and through the fortress.
And marches through our fortresses. That is incomplete synonymous parallelism. Yes. Because we have, when the Assyrian invades our land, the Assyrian is not mentioned in the second one, but you have compensation and you have marches through our fortresses. Fortresses is added to compensate for the loss of Assyrians in the first part. That's also very popular, where you leave out one element from the first line and expand the second line to give it balance. And that would be incomplete parallelism. Incomplete synonymous parallelism. Proverbs 6:16 is the one that I mentioned about there are so many things that certain things here. There are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 that are detestable to him. And then towards the end of Proverbs, there's another group of those. In Proverbs 30 and verse 15, there are 3 things that are never satisfied, 4 that never say enough. Verse 18, there are 3 things that are too amazing for me, 4 that I do not understand. Verse 21, under 3 things the earth trembles, under 4 it cannot bear up. 24, 4 things on office. They had special meetings for the women and special meetings for the men. Remember that? Do you remember the flyer that went out to advertise it? I don't have it here. I have it with my hermeneutics material. It's what? Yeah, it was the weekend. Mm-hmm. It's where you use the same letter for each of your points.
the first point of the sermon will be the mighty man, and the second one will be a monstrous mouse. And then a magnificent goose. So that you get all of them lined up the same way. So it's M, 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 M. Or you have something else here. But the same letter appears. And that is for ease of memorization. And we have some excellent examples of this, where the same letter occurs in the composition of a passage of Scripture. Psalm 119. The first word of each verse begins with the same letter. For the first 8 verses. And then for the next 8 verses, each of the verses begin with the letter B. B. So if you have 8 verses and you have 22 letters of the alphabet, you should have 176 verses in Psalm 119.
Is the first set of 8 Aleph, the second set of 8 Beth? That's why they have in Psalm 119 the letters.
That is, of course, editors. They don't have that in Hebrew, but it's put in there so that you can see what's happening. We'll also have a type of this that occurs in Lamentations, where instead of having the same letter appear at the beginning, you have the next letter. A, B, C, D, through the alphabet.
Would that still be called?
There would still be a letter alliteration.
What's the 22 times 8? What's that?
That's the number of verses that you have in Psalm 119. First, each of there are 22 Hebrew letters, and you have 8 lines with each letter, so it should come out to 176. Now, if you look at Lamentations, the first chapter has 22 verses. The second chapter has 22 verses. I think the third chapter, you have 3 lines that occur with the same, so you should have 3 times 22 or 66 verses. Oftentimes you will have alliteration that spells out something. You are familiar with this, preparing for an examination, and so you make up a word. That's the same idea. Any device that helps you to remember. Often this is used in prayer. You're probably familiar with this. A form of prayer where you start with adoration, and then confession, and thanksgiving, and supplication. And so by using this device, it's easy to remember. So that's really what alliteration is for. And then there's another form that is called assonance. Assonence. And that's where you have the same or similar sounds, usually the vowels, within words. Good example of that in Isaiah, however, it's in Hebrew. Of course, it should be in Hebrew, if we're talking about Hebrew poetry, and where it seems that some of the people are mocking Isaiah, and they say, Tav, Lakav, Tav, Lakav. What does it say? Here a little, there a little, line upon line, precept upon precept. And they're using these small words like we would say, ga, 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 baby talk. And that's what he is doing in that passage. So he says, all right, if you don't like the way I'm speaking now, God is going to teach you by words of foreigners. The Assyrians, they'll teach you. But that's assonance. We also have other passages where the same sounds are repeated for emphasis. I would have to find those also in Hebrew. And then we have one of my favorites, and that is Paronomasia, P-A-R-O-N-O-M-A-S-I-A. Or you can spell it P-U-N, pun. That's what it is, it's a pun. Isaiah 5:7. In the Song of the Vineyard, the vineyard of the Lord Almighty is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah are the garden of his delight. And he looked for justice, but saw bloodshed, for righteousness, but heard cries of distress. Now the justice, bloodshed, righteousness, distress are puns. Now it doesn't come through in English. In Hebrew, it is very evident, because the word that we have for justice is mishpat, and the word for bloodshed is mishpat. Mishpat, mishpah. Very close. And righteousness is tzedakah, and the cry of distress is za'akah. Tzedakah, za'akah. And they sound almost identical. We can do this with one word that I'm familiar with in English, and that is that he looked for justice and got just vice. Justice, just vice. See, where you are saying a word that sounds similar but is the opposite. So that would be a pun. Amos 8:1 also has a pun. This is a vision that he has, and the vision has to do with God's timing. This is what the sovereign Lord showed me, a basket of ripe fruit. What do you see, Amos? He asked. A basket of ripe fruit, I answered. Then the Lord said to me, the time is ripe for my people Israel. I will spare them no longer. Now, it doesn't look like there's much in there until you examine the Hebrew, and what he sees is a basket of kites. And the Lord says, the time is ripe, kates, kites, kates. And so he makes a play on that. Now, this sort of thing is also done in the prophets where it isn't intended for a pun, but by reading it through, you can see where a word is used, and then that same word is later picked up and expanded. And so it's you can see the tie-in, the literary forms that they are using.
So this verse 1 of 8 should be in poetic form then?
No, not in poetic form, because the pun is merely a response to a question. You wouldn't have to have poetry for the use of all these. These are just additional literary devices.
Okay, so starting with the graded numbers, we're no longer in poetry.
Graded numbers usually it occurs only in poetic form. the alliteration only in poetic form. The pun can be in poetry or not.
And the as and
Yes.
poetry.
Mm-hmm. Now another one is Micah, chapter 1, and verses 10 through 14. And part of this can be picked up if you read the footnotes. Tell it not in Gath, weep not at all. And the footnote will tell you that the word for Gath, gat in Hebrew, is very close to the word for tell, which is God, from the God, and the imperative would be God. And got, see, sounds very much like it. So tell it not in Gath. God it not in Gat. And in Beth Ophrah, which means house of dust, roll in the dust. Verse 14, where it says the town of Achziv will prove deceptive. Achziv means deception. So the town of deception will prove deceptive. And he's using all of these towns and making little plays on the name. One other literary device is onomatopoeia. That's O-N-O-M-A-T-O-P-O-E-I-A. In modern Hebrew, we have the name of an object, and that name is bakbuk. And you can guess the name of the object by the sound that it makes. Bakbuk, 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 bakbuk. What is that? It's a jar, and you pour water out of it, a bottle, and it goes bakbuk, bakbuk, bakbuk. And so the name is given according to the sound that is made. And we have a lot of these in English. A lot of them. Spit, because that represents the sound and what is done. Spit. Hum. Murmur. Splat. Crash. Bang. Yeah, all of those are trying to describe the sound itself. And that's what that onomatopoeia is. It's the use of words that sound similar to or suggest the concept that they describe. Oh, that Isaiah passage is kav lakav, tzav latzav, tzav latzav. So tzav and kav are the sounds that we have today. Now, what is the reason really for taking a look at poetry at all? What difference does it make? Whether we examine it as poetry or we look at it as prose? Pardon? In what way would it help understanding the meaning? Can you give me a specific example? You're on the right track. I just want you to say a little bit more.
Well, you can't take it literally. You can't take it what prose is.
You don't take it literally. That is the way we understand literal. It's sometimes symbolic. And the description that we have of the lover your neck is like the Tower of David. It really isn't like the Tower of David. If you know what the Tower of David looks like, her neck really doesn't look like that. But he's trying to express an idea with the use of it, from the familiar to the unfamiliar. So if we understand that, then we do not take that literally, that the Tower of David is her neck.
Is he talking about the church or is he talking about a lady?
I think he's talking about a lady. We'll discuss that when we come to the Song of Songs, but I take it as an Oriental love song. Period.
If we're looking at synonymous parallelism, you know that what they're talking about in the second line is almost identical to in the first line.
Okay,
If we know it's synonymous and not synthetic.
If it is synonymous parallelism, then it gives us a clue as to the meaning of the words. Now, I used a passage for you that will point that up. This is in, I thought it was in Habakkuk. Yes, Habakkuk 3:7. I used this earlier when we were discussing another subject that had to do with Cush. And the reason that I have taken Cush to be Midian, you have the tents and curtains. And Cush and Midian. And let's see, distress is in one and anguish is in the other. I forget which is which. Distress is in first. And anguish here. Now that is synonymous parallelism, and since it comes in this way, the tents of Cush are in distress, the curtains of Midian in anguish, and it's synonymous parallelism. That is why I can connect those two and say Cush and Midian are meant to be equivalents. Otherwise, there's no way that I can say that Cush and Midian are the same unless it occurs here in that synonymous parallelism.
The meaning of it is it supposed to like you guys are saying like the tower. Is that something that they would know what you're talking about, or the whole nation knows what you're talking about?
Anybody would know what he's talking about in that particular culture. They would be familiar with the Tower of David.
Was it especially strong?
I think strong. I think the strength is what they're talking about. Remember, in that culture, that the women carry heavy burdens on the head. And it takes a strong neck or something like that. And usually men do not.
Is that really how we got praise? I mean, that's not necessarily praising her. Praising her industry.
Or her strength. Yes. Yes. Which, yes, there are many things other than the beauty. Character, strength, stamina, all of those things could be used in emblematic as positive virtues.
Is the line between synonymous and synthetic that strong always?
It's fairly strong, yes.
If we're looking at the synthetic, some of it looks sort of synonymous, but not quite.
If the same elements are repeated, then it would be. Now, where you would have difficulty is between synthetic and incomplete parallelism. That would be a little bit shady. But when you have synonymous parallelism like this, then there would be no difficulty.
In the same passage, starting say at verse 8, when we look at say rivers they use in the stream,
yes,
and we go to the sea, in the next verse.
The first two lines would be synonymous.
See the 8? Okay.
And the next three lines then are synthetic.
Okay, so we're looking at, if this is a line, were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? That's the first line. Was your wrath against the streams? The second line, so that's mentioning water too, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And
Third,
anger and wrath.
okay. Did you rage against the sea? So you're seeing it's 3, right?
No, the third line then goes with the next two. Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots? Now that is adding a new element to what he has said. Were you angry with the rivers? Was your wrath against the streams?
Okay, but see, if you drop down here to say verse 9, and then you'll find it here, you split the earth with the river. Right? So you water again. So then he comes in verse 10, and it's the water swept by a deep roar. Currents of water swept by the depth roar and lifted its waves. So it's still talking about waves indicate water also.
Yes, but you have to have more elements than that to be synonymous. In other words, it can't be just one element. It has to be two or more. Where in that third line in verse 9, you split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. There you would have to say, if there is any synonymous parallelism, the rivers and mountains, but it isn't saying the same thing. And then torrents of water swept by. That is giving us a new thought that is not parallel to anything. And the deep roared and lifted its waves on high, again, is a new idea. So that I would classify those as synonymous, or as synthetic parallelism.
Unless by virtue of the fact that it's all dealing with water, it's still would be
that's right. It could all deal with water, but unless the elements correspond, then you would have synthetic parallelism. Yes.
All this talking about, all this fall under
yes, under form criticism. Yes, when we were working on Psalms, I was fortunate enough to be on the final committee for the Psalms, and we had on the committee Bruce Waltke and John Steck, and both of them have done a lot of work with form criticism, and before that time I was completely against any form criticism. But they demonstrated how useful it was in trying to get at the meaning of some of these songs and the format. Unfortunately, some of their suggestions were not followed in the songs. I thought they had done an excellent job showing the structure of the songs. Sometimes a 7-line, 5-line, 3-line, 5-line, 7-line. And it just pointed up how much work had gone into some of the writing of these songs. And form criticism is the device to bring that out. So it works very well in the songs. But I'm not sure that it works too well in other types of literature. I'm still not convinced of it. Yes? Was this one? You mean the printed form, or what we have here is the way that the editors have determined that it should be. This began with Lowe, who was disturbed by the way in which Hebrew was being forced to follow Greek forms of poetry, pentameter, verse. And in his examination, he came to the conclusion that it was not that type of poetry at all. It was a parallelism. And then others followed that and gradually came to these basic forms that I put on the board. Not all of them agree on the breakdown this way, but by analyzing the song, they feel this is the way in which it should be read. Now, they may be wrong. Yes?
Going back to verse 8 and back in 3.
Mm-hmm.
The first two lines are completely synonymous. The third line is synthetic with the first two?
No, synthetic with the next two. Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots?
Okay, that's all one line, though.
It's all one thought.
Mm-hmm. And that one, synthetic, it doesn't have two lines in it. It can be just one line.
It can be one thought. They generally put it into two lines because that's too long for what they consider to be Hebrew poetry. Now, I'll try to point out as we go along in some of the prophets the reason for poetry and the understanding of poetry, because you can keep from a lot of erroneous conclusions if you recognize that the passage is poetry. And I try to bring in some illustrations of that, of people who have gone astray when they have taken them to mean two different things when in reality they're one.
Have you ever found...
And you have to do something about issues. Abortion is a very important issue right now. I suppose most of us, the only thing we do about the abortion issue is talk about it. I expect that's most of us are doing, just talking about it. Or sitting down and thinking about it, not even talking about it. Someplace, when you are a pastor, you're going to have to take action related to it. You're going to have to take the initiative to take that action. Get involved, take that action. Now, I know there's so many issues to be taken up in this world that you're not going to take them all. You're going to have priorities and choose which ones you think that you can handle. The drug scene is another one. The drug scene in America is, as I don't need to tell you, it's a horrible thing. Deteriorating our youth, ruining our nation's future, and destroying so many lives. Well, we are in this student process, studying about it, thinking about it. One day you're going to have to be in the area of action regarding it. You're going to have to be counseling people, rescuing people, fighting against it, doing something. It's action-oriented ethics that has to be considered here. Every one of these issues that we're talking about, whether you're talking about divorce or whether you're talking about U.S. foreign relationships. Just talk is not enough. It must be action-oriented. Okay, I'm trying to say to you in what I've said that so far that we're talking about ethics being action-oriented. You've got to take the initiative, promote it, work on it, put it into process. When a problem comes up in your life, you can't drop it. You've got to do something about it. To drop it is going the opposite direction. If you postpone it, that's procrastination. You're not doing anything about it, it just grows and develops, becomes a monster that you can't handle. If it's something in your own personal life, if you're having difficulty with telling the truth, well, work on it. Take the initiative under the leadership of God to perfect that area of your life. You've got to get into some kind of action related to your own personal ethics. And similarly in terms of our social problems that we have to deal with. All right, that much, but now I want to go into the whole matter of a formulation that I think could help you at this point.
If I may put it up here, my writing is pretty clear. I broke my thumb on one occasion, and ever since I can't hold anything quite properly. And I guess the whole idea that thumbs are so important to me must be very right. This one doesn't work right. Anyway, all right, let me put something down. I'm going to divide the blackboard into maybe 6 different parts. There's no sacred number about 6 you might find at the 7th item, or you might find something less you might put together. But I'm working on formula. And formula that moves. The idea that we're going to get something accomplished. All right. To begin with, you have a base. To begin with, you have that which you know, and that which you believe. You have a faith. And we're going to start with that. That is our theology, as our theological base. Theological base. Keep talking about that because I find it's the way it is in the Bible, and I find out that you can't do anything really in Christian ethics, personal or social, without believing something very deeply. Because you're not going to make up all these notions and ideas yourself. That's pure humanistic ethics. We're back to hedonism, we're back to utilitarianism, we're back to Machiavellianism, we're back to Kant's deontology. If you're going to do it on your own, it's going to be Christian, it's going to come out of the biblical theological foundation. Right? And that's what's going to help you to define your problem. That's what's going to help you to set your principles. That's what's going to help you to know where you're going with this and make decisions. That's going to help you get it in. All right? Now, what is this here? We've got all our theological doctrines. I'm trying to say again and again and again. You got creation, you got covenant. You can't leave these things out. Creation is the way things God made them to be. Covenant is, I'm with you to help you in this process.
And now, is this all part of the first section of the 7?
Yeah. And we're getting judgment, we're getting redemption, all of those things. Those that we listed the other day, last time, these are doctrines. Now, we don't hold them in doctrinal form. You don't need to memorize these. You need to know. You need to live with it. It needs to become a part of you. Do you live in a good world? God's world. Do you believe that God is a provident God? Do you believe that He's set up this whole creation in a certain way with orders that produce life? Or do you think that life is all just sourness and death? What kind of attitude do you have toward what God has given? These are the gifts of God. Carry them around with you. When I discovered this, it just changed my life. I said, I can carry that around with me. That's my basic philosophy. That's what I live by. It changed my outlook on people. It did wonderful things to me. The whole idea that God really, I don't have to memorize these things. I know how to live this way. I know my redemption. I know that I am a new person in Christ Jesus. A new creation in Christ. A new creation it should be. This is our fundamental outlook on life, okay? And it's God's gift to us. It's God's outlook on life that is incarnate. Now then, that also carries with it a theology of love. Divine agape is not just a principle. God is love. God makes you and me to be love. It's wonderful if you could say out loud to yourself, I am love. Wouldn't that be wonderful? If you really believe it, first thing you have to act that way. First thing you say, God is love. His divine agape through the Holy Spirit has taken over. Now, these are certain theological ideas that you would carry with you. Okay, now I'm just trying to get this down. Also, you know that you are working with the Holy Spirit, not on your own. The only problem I see with people who not overemphasize this, I don't think you can overemphasize it, but exclusively emphasize this, is that they leave out the rest. Therefore, they get strange ideas about the Holy Spirit's voices coming in all directions. Things happening that are only for you and nobody else.
That would also get into the God told me to kill somebody type thing.
Good. You're crazy. Alright? Now, but this has its proper place. And very, very important. And to know that I'm directed by the Holy Spirit. That there is this endowment of power to achieve these things. Okay. Yes.
That's true, and I agree with that. Except that it seems to me like there's a lot of emphasis placed on the flakes who, claim to have been told by God to do something weird. When anybody, just an ordinary person, would know that's not of God. I mean, if you can't tell the difference between the kind of dependency on the Holy Spirit that Jesus had and the kind that the flake claims to have, then there's a problem with you. That's not a big problem. In other words, to put down the people who truly are depending on the Holy Spirit as Jesus did, which is really the only substantiation for his authority that he would give when people asked him, by what authority do you cleanse this temple? And he wouldn't give any authority that was humanly based. He would say, do you agree that John the Baptist is from God? Because John the Baptist had received supernatural revelation of who Jesus was. And he would not give any socially conformed basis for his authority. And yet you can tell very well the difference between Jesus Christ's dependency on the Holy Spirit and Simon the magician, who was not really.
Quite right. No argument there whatsoever. I'm only suggesting that if we only base things on this and don't have it balanced out with, because the Holy Spirit is actually there to lead us to knowledge of Christ. He doesn't talk for himself. He's talking to us through Jesus Christ. So it's got to be Christian that we're doing here in terms of the Holy Spirit. And this is the great. We can count on it. We can count on the fact that we can think through a problem, that we can direct this thing to an achieved end, to God's end, through the fact that the Holy Spirit is doing it. But these are ways of helping us to keep that sound. So, right now, let's get into the problem. There's your problem. Now, how are you going to define this problem? Problem analysis is extremely important. You must get into it as thoroughly as you can. But I want to emphasize now, if you don't have this problem informed by all of this, you're going to come up with very humanistic ends in your religion. You're going to think this thing through, maybe from a very personal standpoint. Or you're going to consider that what's gone wrong here isn't so bad after all, because everybody's doing it. And you're not determining your problem from all the rest that comes through as underlying. You would not conclude that this is sin, the problem is sin, unless you had this kind of undergirding of what you're talking about. You just say, oh, he made a mistake or something. That's not so bad after all. But to take it very seriously, you've got to see the thing in the theological light. So you're examining your problem from this viewpoint. You're examining it from a theological viewpoint, from a sociological viewpoint, from a psychological viewpoint, from a physical viewpoint. The problems come in all directions, and they're very important for us to be thorough about the examination of the problem. Now, the Roman Catholic moral theologians strictly tell us, and they could be right to some extent, because some of us are very careless about problem analysis. They tell us that most of us don't have the grounds for analyzing problems. Only a few who have been so trained can analyze these problems. Now, if you're counting on, if you know your faith, and if you have the guidance of the Holy Spirit, you don't need to go to a Roman Catholic priest to get your ethical problem sorted out. Because you're doing it on very solid ground. And so problem analysis is very important to the situation. Now we're going to look at the fact that, and I'll take this up, when will I take it up? Better take it up somewhat now. As we said before, that Joseph Fletcher, in his situational ethics, he centers on the problem. He excludes this. Says, we don't need this background. We just come to look at the problem. Every problem, he says, is different. He says, out of the situation, you will understand what is what, and therefore you make a judgment about it from a situational viewpoint. That's why we call it situational ethics. He focuses on the problem. We don't focus on the problem. The problem is very important, but we have a way of understanding the problem from a much wider base. Now he says, the only answer you need to give it is apply love. Don't go through any other process. Take your love, look at your problem, make your solution. You don't want to do anything else. He just wants this and this to be taken into consideration. And the criticism that he's been getting, quite rightly, not from everybody, because some people like his notion, but the criticism he's been getting is that he's not thorough enough. He's not rooted in Christian faith.
Well, how does he define love, Dr. Carter? Does he have a good definition?
Yeah, he calls it agape. He says it's the love for others. But it's not very intricate love from a theological viewpoint. It's not a theological love. He never talks about Christ's love, for example. He talks about love until you put it up somewhere.
Well, how can you say it's agape if it's not Christ's love?
Well, I'm not suggesting that he doesn't say it's Christian. He gets his ideas of agape. But he doesn't like us to think that Jesus Christ would define our love. That he gave us his love, maybe, but he hasn't spelled it out for us, so to speak. He comes somewhat out of the existential situation. If you are responsible yourself, make your own situation, your own conclusions in your life, based upon your understanding of God. The main argument we have against it is not theological, not Christ-oriented.
Sweet energy, 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 sweet energy,